before I had an open door. So I told myself I'd never let that happen again. I've been walking around, self-esteem is down.
Welcome back, Facebook family and internet world. This is part 2 to the two-part series of sexual abuse. Now, every year, thousands and thousands of young women and young men are sexually abused. 2 out of 3 women or young girls will be sexually abused or have been sexually abused. 3 out of 5 men or boys have been or will be sexually abused. This is an epidemic that is so out of control. And those are the numbers or the statistics that are reported. What about the ones that are not reported? The ones that we don't know about? This is definitely a hush-hush and a taboo topic in many of our homes. But you know what? I have to share with you today that if we continue to cover it up, if we continue to not tell, it's going to continue to ruin the lives of our young girls and our young boys. Now, I'm going to share a little bit with you today about my story. I grew up in church. I was born and raised in Monrovia, California. I grew up in a family church. My mother and all her siblings, my grandmother was members of this church. A very close friend of our family, who was my godfather, molested me. And it happened, the first time it happened was at a camp, a summer camp retreat that we went to. Now, when I think about this man, he was a very handsome man. I remember growing up, and all of the young girls were just smitten with him. They just, was always around him. He was very charismatic, very popular, and could sing and play the instrument, play the piano. And as a young girl, I looked at him and I said, man, he is fine. And I want to know and I want to see what they have, what's in him and what they're seeing, So I guess I got my opportunity, unbeknownst to me, that I was going to get my opportunity. I did not know. After that particular day or that event happened, I was a little confused. I didn't know how I wanted to handle it or how I wanted to deal with it, but I was quiet and withdrawn. And I remember him talking to me one day and saying, because he noticed that I was withdrawn. He asked me, he said, "Do you want to get me in trouble?" Because everybody started to notice that there was something different about me. And I told him, I said, "No, I don't want to get you in trouble. As a little girl, I'm like, I love you. I want to protect you. I would never hurt you." And so from that point on, he had me. And he had me mentally. And so I was there. The sexual abuse went on until I was 20, I want to say about 21, until I decided that enough was enough and I didn't want that anymore. It was a perverted relationship. And so many of us are caught in these types of relationships and don't even know how to deal with them, don't even understand how this has happened, how I got myself into this. For so many years, I blamed myself. People would see certain things and they would question me. They would ask, is this going on? Is that going on? But I would lie. I would lie to protect him, because I was a child. I internalized a lot of things that I did. I internalized a lot of things that, because there were a lot of people that when it all came out, a lot of people blamed me. They blamed me and my mother. They blamed my mother for trusting this man, and they blamed me. They labeled me as, she was old enough to know right from wrong. She was old enough to know what she was doing. But you know what? Here's a question. If grown women, 25, 35, 45, if we have issues dealing with men and their mind games, how does a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old child deal with a 35, 40-year-old man? How does her mental capacity, How is she able to even wrap her mind around that? So for those of you who had that to say, really, for real, when you really think about it, it's the man's responsibility. He knew exactly what he was doing. And it took me years. When I say years, it took me years to forgive myself, to get over just the fact that, you know what, I did this. I put myself in that position. I allowed him to do this to me. And I didn't tell my mother because I didn't want to hurt her. I was afraid. So let me tell you how it all came out. He actually told a very close friend, well, he told my aunt, who was a very close friend of his, when I was getting married, when he found out that I was getting married, he went and he told my aunt about the whole thing. And I guess at this point, he called himself being in love with me. How do you get true love from something that started out perverted? That part I don't understand. But my aunt called me and I went to her house and we talked about it, and it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I still was not free. I was not delivered yet. Years had gone by and I found out that he had did the exact same thing to a number of my relatives, to a number of friends. And I was the only one that had the courage and the strength to come forth and say, hey, this is what happened. Now, I say that with a very humble heart because I understand that it's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I did this, or I allowed this to happen, or this happened to me. And now if I come forth and I tell and I share, then now people are going to look at me differently. I had to come to a place in my life where it didn't matter how people looked at me. My oldest daughter was molested. And it was at that point that I knew that this has to stop. Somebody has to take up this cross, pick up the mantle, and say, enough is enough. You can no longer do this. This is no longer acceptable. You have to be held accountable to what you're doing. Now, I've written a book called Piercing the Veil. Now, this is not about my book, but my book was one of the reasons that allowed me to continue in my healing process. When I wrote my book, there was a flood of emotions that started coming back. And there are some pictures in my book of me when I was a little girl. And when I found those pictures, I just broke down and I cried. I mean, my children thought something literally, like something was hurting me or something literally happened because I was just bawling. And it was because the little girl in the picture, I'm looking at her and nobody mourned for her. Nobody mourned for that little girl. And it was at that moment that I mourned for her. I cried at the death of this little girl because he killed the innocence in this little girl. And I had to realize that all of my life, all of the things that I had gone through had stemmed from this. Me and my aunt was talking when I wrote my book, and I had a publicist, and she had told me, she said, you know, Raquel, she said, once you publish this book, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to go full-fledged with it? Are you going to hit it strong? And a number of people found out about the book, and a lot of people had their own opinions, which is fine because, you know, we all have an opinion. But I was having a conversation with my aunt, and she had some concerns herself, you know, and she said, you know, I want you to publish the book. I support you. I'm behind you 100%. But here's some things that you need to consider. That when you publish this book, you know, people may not come after you, but they may come after your mother. You know, it may affect your children, you know. And I talk to my children about this. I'm very open with my children so they know what has happened and what the book is all about. Now, I was concerned about how my mother would be able to deal with it because my mother was very hurt behind this whole situation. But I told my aunt, I said, you know what? the generations, when you look at the different generations, the baby boomers, and the people who are now 60 and 70, they grew up in an era where, you don't tell. You take it to the Lord in prayer, and that's where you leave it. You don't call nobody on it. Oh, he's just being a man, or she shouldn't have put herself in that situation. They do say that stuff. And I told my aunt, I said, but this generation of people, we're in your face. We're saying, hey, that is not acceptable, and you need to be held accountable for your actions. I was sitting in her room, and I get a little emotional, so you guys have to please forgive me. But I was sitting in her room, and we were talking, and my little cousin walked in the room, and my heart broke, because I said, if I don't tell, who is going to protect her? Who is going to protect her? And we're so busy. Sometimes we get selfish. We get selfish in our own thinking. Like, oh my God, I don't want them to know because of what they're going to say about me. But you know what? You went through something. God brought you out. Every day is a new day. You're breathing. You're working. You're doing what you need to do. Guess what? You are alive, and you're alive to tell your story, and you're alive to help somebody else. I know that had I told my story, I could have saved some other young girls that came up behind me. But I didn't, and I was afraid. But I say to you today, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to tell. You need to get to somebody, and you need to tell them what's going on. There are some things that I wanted to share with you on how I was able to heal, and really heal completely, mentally and physically. The first thing that I did was I had to come to the conclusion and realization that it was not my fault. I was a baby. I was a child. And I was taken advantage of by a grown man. So I had to realize that, and I had to forgive myself. So I'm telling you, it is not your fault. You did not do anything wrong. You trusted, and you were taken advantage of. So you need to understand that it is not your fault. Next, journal your thoughts. Write down your thoughts. Write them out. Stuff that come to you, your feelings, whatever happened, that whole situation. Journaling is very therapeutic. It helps you. So journal. Write it down. Okay? Positive activities. Start doing positive activities. Take up yoga. Take up painting. Color. Get you some crayons and a coloring book. Meditate. Pray. You need to do something that's positive, that's going to basically start opening your mind up to new and exciting and relaxing things. Okay? Because that will put you in a different disposition. Okay? You also need to share your story. Share your story. Tell somebody. Tell an authority figure of what happened. And if they don't listen, and if they don't believe you, find someone else to tell. Matter of fact, you can tell me. You can email me. And we can dialogue about it. We can talk about it. Inbox me. If whoever you told did not hear you or did not listen and doesn't want to do anything about it and doesn't want to support you, inbox me. Okay? The next thing is get yourself in a safe place if you feel that you are fearful for your life. Get out of that situation. Get yourself to a safe place. Okay? The next thing you have to do, which was something that was so therapeutic for me, was you need to report it. You need to go to the police and report it. Last year I did my first conference with Young Hearts Desire, my nonprofit organization. And there was a doctor there who sat on my panel. And she said to me, she said, you will never be completely healed until you release this man out of your spirit. You are still protecting him. And I didn't understand that. I said, what do you mean I'm protecting him? She said, why haven't you turned him in? Why haven't you filed a police report? Out of all these years, why haven't you? And I had to stop and think, and I'm like, oh my God, that is so true. Even though the statute of limitations have ran out, I still needed to do that step for my own healing. And so you know what I did? That next morning I got up and I went down to the police station and I filed a report. When I got home, I felt so liberated. I said, he has no more holds on me. No more holds on my mind, my emotions, my self-esteem. No more. I was free. Free. So I'm telling you, if you were molested 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or yesterday, or 3 weeks ago, go and tell. You do not have to stay a victim. You do not have to stay in this place. And I want to share this in closing with those of you who know that people are molesting people. You know these individuals. You know that they have molested your loved one or a friend, and you've done nothing about it. You continue to turn a blind eye. You are just as guilty. Just as guilty. And I'm sorry to say that you are. You are aiding and abetting a fugitive, a criminal. And if you really love them, you will get them help. You will make them go and get help.